session for today's afternoon. So that is Dr. Venkat Yetaru. He is General Manager, Head Analytical R&D and CMC at Lupin, India. Dr. Yetaru is an experienced professional in biosimilar development. He led teams in CMC, analytical development, quality control, and drug product manufacturing. He has overall 24 plus years of experience in various analytical aspects of proteins and therapeutic proteins specifically. Dr. Yetaru had been previously associated with reputed organizations like IIC as a PhD researcher in biochemistry and molecular biology, University of North Carolina as a postdoctoral research associate, and Dr. Reddy's Laboratories as Director and Head of External Manufacturing. Over to you, sir.
This particular presentation. The first two speakers, the Jyoti and Amarnath, they pretty much covered it. So I have a very general presentation. I'll try to package the same thing in a different body. It's going to be the same flavor actually, what you are going to get it out of this presentation. Now, the CQAs, so this particular one, looking into the next 5 days, we have a lot of the talks. Mostly they are going to cover on the several advanced analytical units. So which are actually going to tell you the theory and then how these kind of, the perform the assays, what are the necessary controls to learn and unravel the molecular characteristics. So the one important thing is morning Naren was mentioning about one of the area, I think if you go into the late 90s and early 2000 and all, we have in the small molecule area, India was a very dominant player, right? We had a very similar success story. India is that kind of prominent area. So in fact, in the global arena, small molecules, you have a lot of advances made in terms of the generics. And then name from this industry, like from the UBCT, there are several people went on to establish successful organizations. Now, India started the journey in the biotech way back in 20 years back, probably close to that. And we haven't made much progress. So the one of the reason is, unlike in chemistry area, there is a lot of the kind of, the on-job training and then the skill development that was pre-existing. Similar kind of a thing is not happened in the conscious way. The programs, workshops like this, only what I learned from Ratnesh was we started somewhere around 2017 in a small way. Now we are actually doing it in a big way in the larger forum, inviting a lot of extras like you in terms of kind of what's happening in this area, what are the things needed to be there. As Naren mentioned, I think the skill development that is happening now. So this is going to be a very exciting phase. There's various development around this area. Now, in this context, I will quickly move on to some of my presentation outline. It's already covered by two speakers earlier, so some of the areas which they already covered, I will not get into the detail. There are areas which are not touched upon, I'll try to give up. So I'm not going to spend much time on the definitions. This is the same definition. Other folks also picked it up from the ICH QA. One of the very important thing I would like to highlight on this particular point, when you say CQA, what is the timing? When do you have to actually, when you have a molecule, you need it, there are particular quality attributes. There are several quality attributes. The timing is very important. Now, what happened in a lot of, like I've been in the industry from last 15 years or so. One of the things I learned is we actually define something as a CQA. That particular thing, you need to have information from the credible knowledge sources. Even before going there, you start with your innovator molecule, and then you will have certain methods. If you use the blend methods, you try to generate a particular profile from the innovator. But if your method is not sensitive, what happens is after 2 years, you travel in your product development, again you go back. I think a lot of us learned in a hard way doing these things again. Moving forward, I think there are lessons learned from this need. Ensure the thing we should not get into that vicious loop of the redevelopment, doing things again and again. Now, the key here is the doing the things right first time. So that's where defining the CQA in a proper way is very important. And then for that, you require a strong documented evidence. If it is available, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. If the information already exists in the literature, go ahead and fetch it, close the wheel there. If that doesn't exist, when you are defining something as a CQA, there's a lot of uncertainty around. You try to do some work very early on within your organization because it's a molecule specific. Define these things in the very beginning. So why this is important? So this is a CQA is not that it's a static thing. Very early on, I think Dhananjay was also mentioning in the morning, it is a kind of, initially when you don't know about it, be conservative, try to rank it very high. As you move forward, once you acquire more knowledge about it, you can actually revisit at that particular quality whether that is a critical or not. So being a conservative, you put that as a CQA so that you focus more attention towards it. Because that is a more important rather than assuming it's not a non-CQA and then go ahead and then do your process development, and that's not going to help you anyway. So one thing I must say, CQA is the central to your product development. This will have an impact on your control strategy. Once you know, for example, aggregates are kind of very well, that needed to be controlled. Similarly, there are certain post-translational modifications. For example, this is a very debatable issue. C-terminal lysine heterogeneity. Often people spend a lot of time introducing, they know their cell culture thing, it has a lysine heterogeneity over there. We have in both K1 and K3. People spend time because that's inherent nature to the cell type. Sometimes it is a signature to the particular cell type what you are expressing. People go to the next extent, they would actually add the CPB to the cell culture broths and all. So we need to really revisit such a strategy. Do I really need to be worried about it? Because there are several cases in the literature. There are two schools of thoughts always. In the science, you always have a group of people who will endorse one theory, other group of people will endorse another theory. So this is something one needed to take a conscious call on it. Because if you try to introduce a CPB kind of a thing to remove the lysine heterogeneity, you have to show the clearance of such an impurity. When do you introduce that? So this is something, do you introduce at the harvest stage? Again, harvest stage is going to be cost intensive. But if you are going to introduce after the protein A, HPLC, again, removal is going to be a challenge. So these are the things one need to exercise, need to take a call one way or another very early. And then similarly, CQA definitions are very important in terms of selecting the test panel for the in-process and AS and BP. And then stability specifications. Now, in terms of the process characterization, if there is something is a CQA, we need to work on the process to define the range of features. And also in terms of the comparability studies. So that comparability is the one, there are multiple times you do the comparability. Most important one is what you are going to do before the BLA submission. That's the BLA submission is the final one. That's a proper risk ranking of proper categorization of CQAs is very important. That is going to be the one of the final categorization you will be doing before submission. Now, there will be other things. Whenever you introduce a process change, there is something is changing between the two processes. If it is not a CQA, you are okay. But if it is a CQA, you need to control it well within the, compared to the previous process. So this is something which I adopted from a recent, very recent conference which was held in Washington DC, the Generics and Biosimilar Conference. So the target product profile here, this is basically on the x-axis is your development timeline, and then y-axis is the cost. So more you spend time during the development timeline, the cost of the kind of development is going to increase. I think as morning Ratnesh mentioned, I think we should keep in mind these are the very expensive medicines. And then we have a lot of opportunity to squeeze your development timelines. One need to spend less time in the product development. There are certain things that are kind of predictable here. Your product development, having the material of the right quality, today that is the very highly variable. Clinical development timelines, like clinical trial timelines, nowadays they are all very streamlined. So you have a various CROs who does these studies. There is a high degree of predictability how much time your clinical development is going to take. The development timelines until to make a product of the desirable quality to take into the phase 3 trials, that's a highly variable. Today, in my experience, what I have seen, anywhere between the 5 to 6 years. I think with all our collective knowledge gathered from last few years, we should shrink that to 2 years. right? That would actually bring that's a wishful thinking, but I'm saying that's something we need to, I think we can do. Today we are at a stage, we should be able to define those things. And there are ways and means of doing that. For that, key is define the right target profile, right? So that's where I think morning Dhananjay's presentation, he was mentioning, start your analytical method development very early. Have a right analytical methods, which actually deciphers the complete information at the high resolution in the innovator level. So then you are defining the target product profile very early on, right target product profile. Now focus all your efforts in terms of the process development, in terms of the various other things to meet this target product profile. So that way you will be shrinking this entire timeline, so that is going to be a win-win situation both for the company which is developing the product, similarly the kind of patients who are going to receive this particular medicine. So this is a very important, as we mentioned, in order to define the right target profile, prerequisite is the having the right CQAs. So they are all interdependent. So this is something which a kind of generic outline I projected over here. We don't have to go through this entire content. I would like you to focus on this particular part. This is the area we have a lot of kind of opportunity to shrink that, as I mentioned that. So this is where we see the clone selection. I think someone was mentioning, I think morning Naren was asking about whether the kind of what kind of modifications what you are getting, does the copy number has any influence? So today there is a lot of technologies, copy number, depending on which expression system you choose to do that. There the copy number doesn't matter. But some of these modifications, especially you would get to know based on the product knowledge, if you have a higher titer within the cell, are we going to overwhelm the glycosylation and machinery not to complete that entire glycosylation? So these are the things we can do the bit of the diligence on the product. Now, this is where I think, as I mentioned, we should know about our molecule. The very first thing, this is the, like a lot of the companies, they wanted to get into the biotech area. Without, I would say, the very early on, the companies who gotten into the thing, the molecule, that due diligence, there are some cases they have done well, but there are cases that are kind of, you can do a bit more on that. So today's scenario, whoever is coming into the thing, that's one of the things one must do based on whatever the knowledge we gathered. Know your molecule very well. We should know what is the primary mechanism of action. There are other things, for example, the bevacizumab, primary mechanism of action is scavenging the VEGF away. But it has the FC, being the monoclonal antibody, it has the FC portion. Right? It has a certain other side effects. I mean, you need to do thorough diligence on that. Even though you are not going to take it forward for the completion, you have it in the routine testing, you should show that there are no off-target effects. Clearance mechanisms, again the glycans, high mannose forms, they are known to kind of important for the clearance. Depending on the nature of the molecule, one must show the clearance mechanisms are not going to be bad. And amino acid sequence and post-translational modifications, I have a few illustrations, but some beautiful illustrations I kind of adopted from some of the presentations I will show you later. So we need to ensure what is the complete amino acid sequence. Once knowing that, we will know what are the hotspots for the modifications, what are the hotspots for the degradation, and then also what would be the kind of the glycosylation profile. Is there any possibility there will be a certain kind of a sequences? Can there be non-specific, can glycosylation will take place or not? We can do a lot of in silico things by looking into these things. There is no such possibility in that. And if you are looking into the CDRs, we need to see are there any kind of areas prone for the modifications. We need to ensure that it's all case to case specific. So we must do that, know that information. So similarly, similar information we can gather from the platform knowledge. So all this, I think, having that, knowing your molecule thoroughly, which will help you defining the CQAs, in turn defining the right test panel to understand the molecule. So again, I'm not going to go into the details. There are product-specific CQAs, and then you also have a process-specific. Of course, process-specific you will control through by designing the process. You will take care of that. product specific CQAs are the ones we need to be worried more about it. Again, there is another aspect which other two speakers probably not touched upon is the composition and strength. So this is a very important, there are cases, for example, erythropoietin that actually comes with multiple dosages, right? So starting from the 15 micrograms, 25 micrograms, 40 and all. That's where it becomes very critical depending on the hematocrit level. The doctor prescribes this kind of a dosage to be taken. That's where it will become very critical in terms of the dose. We need to ensure the thing it doesn't overlap into the next class. So this is a one illustration, beautiful illustration which I pulled it from the one of these conferences. I think it took a permission from the OLED to reproduce it over here. So this actually shows you the complexity from starting from the small molecule like an aspirin to the ACE inhibitor. This only have a 62 atoms. You have an insulin, so 2 chains, about 790 atoms, where you have a monoclonal antibody. So basically looking into that, by increasing the size, more molecules, and then it is also coming from the cell lines, that itself is very complex. I mean, that actually throws a lot of challenge into people who are working in this area. Now, this is another illustration we picked it up. This is the part all the biosimilar companies will try to match it. But when you come into the non-operating parts, for example, there are certain, I think you had given one beautiful example about the glycan. There is a small difference in that glycan. That particular thing, it doesn't have any relevance to that of the mechanism of action. You are okay to do with that. I think you pack it with the various structure function studies. You show that in multiple means your operating parts are identical. Non-operating parts, there are some subtle differences. They are okay to do. These are the things one need to kind of have a constant dialogue with the regulators. We can actually get a advice from these briefing books and all. This is a these are the differences we have, and then we are planning to do so and so studies. We will actually show through the various structure function studies that okay, it's not going to have an impact. So we need to get a prior buy-up before we travel too far. So this is again another example. So the insulin, people say it's a very simple molecule. It's not a simple molecule. People who work in that area, they would know. So it's only the 2 peptides. We have an intermediate peptide will be cleaved. Now when you have that insulin, one of the problem is this particular protein, it forms a dimer. That's the active form. And then it has a tendency to aggregate. That's something needed to be controlled. And then for that, you need to have a very sensitive analytical method which shows you this, how are you controlling the aggregate. And then also it's very important with the biotech drugs is the process, the consistency of process is very important. You need to have a methods to show the process is kind of very controlled, and then you don't have a batch to batch variability that much. That should be well within the acceptable variable levels. So this particular slide where you have a 2 heavy chains, 2 light chains, they are held together by disulfide bonds. Now they pointed out there can be a N-terminal heterogeneity over here. There can be a C-terminal heterogeneity. These are the spots which are prone for the oxidation and denudation. And then glycan, this can exist in any one of the 15 to 16 different forms, right? Now imagine this structure itself is a complex. Now we have additional add-ons, right, to certain amino acids. When you are taking the drug, there is a possibility that we have a several thousands of combinations can exist in the same dose, right? One need to control to the kind of, whatever the extent possible with analytical methods. So anyway, you are going to kind of, learn from some of the advanced analytical techniques. There's a lot of talks are focusing on the mass spec characterization, and then there are some CE methods. So this is one example. Morning Dhananjay was mentioning about, don't worry about increasing the titer for the kind of desired species. But I just picked an example. One of the problems is that when the people working on it, either dobupoietin alpha or erythropoietin, this will be a profile of the the IEF profile, IEF Western blot. If you do, you have an isoforms in case of erythropoietin, you already will have 0 to 14 forms. In case of the dobupoietin alpha, 0 to 23 forms. When you look into the design, what I highlighted in this particular box, they are very less than 1%. One of the problem with the very early on when the people started developing, they didn't have a proper HPLC based method and all to actually know about what is the title. So, and then I'm sure many of you guys who work with the Darby-Poetin alpha, erythropoietin, batch to batch variability, yields can vary anywhere between the kind of, there is a 5 to 6 fold. Right? So your yields will be very highly variable. Now when you are presenting to the any regulator, even from the DCGI or something, when they look into the control trend charts with the yield, when they see such kind of spikes, it's very difficult to explain to them. You don't know that variability is coming because of the upstream or is it because of the downstream. Now, I think analytical methods, I think today with the technology and all, it is possible to develop a methods where you can actually get to know that information very early on. That means in the harvest itself. So that would actually help upstream scientists to work on certain condition to enrich this kind of a species. So that way, I know in the cost perspective, it may not be much of an issue, but you can do it in a campaign mode. You can take a 3 or 4 batches a year and be done with the thing, move on to the other product. So it will help you to utilize your multi-product facility in a kind of a manner, in most efficient manner. So these are again list of various modifications. So these are the specifics. So these are the N-terminal modifications. I think I will let you read through that, and then I'll carry this presentation, share it with you if required. So what would be the potential impact? So all these things, whether the attribute is critical or not, primarily we evaluate based on whether that has any clinical relevance or not. If you have abundant information is available from literature or from your own studies, so that particular attribute, you know what is the clinical impact. Now, less you know about it, there is a more of uncertainty. So the most of the critical quality attribute assignment today, most of the companies who follow, that revolves around these two factors. One is the clinical relevance, second one is uncertainty. And then there is a different scoring and all. I will actually show to you in the next couple of slides. So I'll not go through the details here. I think other speakers who already talked about this. So how do we do the risk assessment here? I think Amarnath just now touched upon a little bit about how do we categorize the quality attributes. All the kind of, the companies, whoever does the critical quality attribute assignment, they, as I mentioned, it will use the clinical relevance or uncertainty. Sandoz has a very complex tool. They use some multifactorial things and all. One need not to go to that extent. Even the AMAP case study what we have shown. So basically, all these methods, all these things, each of the quality attribute, take it. What do you know from the literature, whether it has a clinical impact or not? And then if we don't have that one, by conservative uncertainty score will be high. And again, this important aspect, this Jyoti already mentioned, CQA risk ranking. When you are taking, you have let's put it in the different categories, you may have a 40 or different quality attributes. There are several of them will be applicable. Each of these attributes, when you are actually categorizing, you have to have an explanation for that, whether it's clinically relevant or not. You have to cite the relevant literature. And then uncertainty also you have to put that if you don't have any information, and then maybe if you have any in-house studies, you do that. And this particular thing is very important, especially if you are going for the BLA submission, your risk ranking and all is very important. If required, one need to get an advice from the agency. This is how you categorize whether the agency is acting ultimately impact or not. If it is not, you can actually revisit that. So this CQA risk ranking has to be systematic. For example, clinical impact, typically you give a score of 2 to 20. If we have a highest, like if it is having required for the biological activity, immunogenicity and safety, you will give the highest thing of 20. And then if it is not important, the least would be 2. Uncertainty, more you know, the lesser uncertainty, less you know, the higher uncertainty. Combination of these will give you the risk score. So as I mentioned in the beginning, This is a much iterative. In the beginning, as a being conservative, you try to put certain quality attributes as a critical quality attribute. As you gain more knowledge, structured function studies, you can revisit, you can downgrade them. So again, FDA earlier had a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, that kind of thing. Now they moved away from that. You can use your kind of, a lot of people use the very high, medium and low. Whatever you do, it has to have a particular logic and then you can adapt to that. So these are the process related impurities. I'm not going to go through the details. So the final, in summary, the guiding principle, when you are doing the CQA risk ranking, we should get that information from the credible sources. We should consider all relevant MOEs. And we should focus on the potential impact of the attribute if it is observed. Attributes are either critical or non-critical, regardless the relative abundance of the attribute or level of control. So the attributes with the high uncertainty should be designated as a CQAs. CQA assessment should evolve during the development program. So I think it's a 2OD. I think I'm not going to go through the details because other two speakers, they explain in detail. If you have any questions, I can take it.
Since we are running short of time, we can just take one question and you can interact more during the lunch.
Yes.
So.
How do you do your risk analysis in your company? Like, do you do like on an Excel spreadsheet? You come together as a team. What is your process of doing risk analysis?
So pretty much, so certainly like there's a group who does this, and then you would have all the part sharing leaders and all will come together. This is what the thinking, like we list out all these assets. And then basically you give a score for the clinical impact and uncertainty. There will be a justification. These are the sources, whatever if you are taking information from the publicly available sources, you will take that information from the sources. And then you try to give those references, and then you have a justification over there. And then based on that, basically like whether there is an alignment or there is no alignment. If the information, there are sometimes there will be certain publications that would be not actually the backed up by the actual data. Sometimes it may be usable. So we need to segregate those views from the actual something that is supported by the data-driven information. So those are the things we go through, and then sometimes and then there will be a kind of platform knowledge. And then there are people who work in a similar kind of area, they will have their insights. Yeah, so it's a collective effort, but we should do that very early on. Today what is happening is, these are the CQA risk ranking people doing probably after kind of a process consistency. And then that's where you realize, okay, this is a critical previously which was not considered, then you go back, that means again you go back to the drawing board, like an upstream process, you need to control this particular thing. So there are certain things you can take care through the downstream. But if something needed to be controlled to the upstream, you already targeted the better part to the consistency batches, then again you need to go back and do that.
Yeah.
So these are the things you need to do very early on. I think in the biosimilar area, the luxury here is that we have innovator molecule.
Yes.
Again, being said that there are certain innovator molecules, amount of protein will be very limited. There are certain cases, MAPS, there is no issue.
Yeah.
There are certain cases, for example, cytokinins are amounts are very limited. So sometimes some of the methods requires a large quantities.
Yeah.
So some of the companies that may be a limitation. But I think considering the entire timeline, I think we must know this information very early. So that's the key. So we should be able to share the timelines.
I had a comment. Do you mind if I may just make one comment on the risk process? So one of the things that I've learned in the last year, after talking to many different companies around the world. Previously, I used to work for one company, so I always like focused on one company. Now I'm looking at many different ways. And one way that I've learned is very enlightening is when you look at risk analysis and you try to do it in an Excel spreadsheet. One, it doesn't work. Excel spreadsheets don't work for risk analysis, and I'll tell you why. And that's one thing I'll tell you. And the second thing I'll tell you, there's a third thing that will come up. In addition to uncertainty and impact, there's a third point, which is the ability to detect. We don't put that. If you have an assay to detect the uncertainty, the risk reduces. So it's actually uncertainty, impact, ability to detect gives you a risk priority risk. We don't use risk ability to detect in the ICHQ9 formula, right? Because we go with the formula. What I said in the morning also, the guidelines are guidelines, read the guidelines, but go beyond the guidelines. You have to start thinking beyond, how do you think outside the guidelines? So that's one thing. So one thing that we've thought about is this way. So when you use English language, sorry, a little bit long, but it's important. We always think about cause and effect, right? We say there's a glycosylation, there must be some effect, but it doesn't happen like that. You have a risk of glycosylation. Let's say you're looking at all the risks. You have glycosylation, you have deamidation, you have make a large list of all the risks that you see, right? You take glycosylation as one risk. What is the cause? There are, for that one glycosylation, let's say sialic acid, there are 10 causes, right? You can't put it in an Excel spreadsheet because if this is the risk, the causes are 10 risks like that. Each cause has 10 effects. So you have to have a multi-dimensional, and each effect has multiple impacts. So you can't make this in an Excel spreadsheet.
So just to answer that particular one, we've been through a couple of ideas.
Yes.
To keep things simple, we actually resorted to only the clinical impact and uncertainty.
Yes.
As you mentioned, some of the detectability, various other things.
Yes.
Why actually we think actually we are scoring kind of low? You are actually bringing this dimension.
Exactly.
The process control, detectability,
Exactly.
the various things you bring into that, and then you can actually either downgrade or being conservative, you can put it in the high or something.
Exactly.
See, what happens is if the CQAs are the very high or high, you have to do the quality range approach or equivalence and all. Most of the functional ones you can actually go with the equivalence testing, and then the two-sided quality ranges where you can actually use the tighter quality ranges and all those things. So the FDA is pretty much okay nowadays with all these things. As you mentioned, these are the things we'll go into the justification. So I think generally most of the people, I think, trying to get into this kind of very simple risk ranking approach. There are some people does that, doesn't hurt, but I'm saying especially if you are trying to park something into a moderate kind of the borderline CQA, taking either here or down, and then that's where you need to have a solid justification. It's all depending on how many number of RMP molecules you are actually using. Because if it is a CQA, you have to use 10 or more. So that's where it is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Now I request Prajakta ma'am to give a token of gratitude to Dr. A. I thank all the keynote speakers for this session. Now we move on for the lunch break.